Nearly 500,000 people slaughtered in a forgotten war. Cannibalism, crucifixions, and entire cities erased. Roman sources are fragmented, and many wars were never recorded. This one was almost lost to history. It was the Kitos War, the second great Jewish revolt, an explosion of violence across the entire Eastern Empire. Today, we uncover the story of this titanic and devastating forgotten conflict. History is not a complete tapestry. It is a collection of torn threads preserved by chance. From the 1st century AD onwards, the sources available on the Roman Empire become chillingly sparse. So they are fragmentary, offering glimpses of profound truths, yet they remain tantalizingly incomplete. What we know is overshadowed by the vastness of what we have lost. Abraham, we see the empire through a dark glass, piecing together the movements of legions and the fates of emperors from incomplete histories in broken stone. Japan, in recent decades, the shovels of archaeologists have unearthed mute witnesses to this lost history. Inscriptions, carved in stone and buried by time, have been found across the breadth of the empire, from the frigid passes of the Alps to the baking sands of Egypt. Dora, these stones attest to wars. They speak of campaigns, of legions dispatched, of victories won, and of enemies subdued. These were wars that consumed thousands of lives. Wars that reshaped the frontiers and drained the imperial treasury. And yet these conflicts were not recorded in the great writings of Dio Cassius, Herod, and other major historians of the 1st, 3rd, and 4th centuries. They are ghosts existing only in the chiseled lists of titles on a governor's statue or the dedication of a forgotten altar. They are absent from the narrative we have inherited. Other wars, however, have not been entirely forgotten in our written sources. They flicker in the surviving chapters of ancient texts, their names preserved. But even these conflicts are not documented with the same exhaustive, painstaking detail as the great civil wars of the late Roman Republic and the early Empire. The struggles of Caesar, of Augustus, of Vespasian, these were chronicled with a you-are-there intensity. The later wars are often reduced to grim summaries, their complexities lost. All right, one of these shadowed wars has come down in history under a simple, almost administrative name. It is known as the War of Kitos. It is a name that belies the horror it contains. Why it is a name that signifies a cataclysm. And if the account of Dio Cassius, a historian who wrote generations later, is even remotely true, this was a war of almost unprecedented destruction and human tragedy. It was a conflict that rivaled the greatest calamities of the ancient world. Yet it remains a footnote in the shadow of other, more famous rebellions. To understand the Kitos War, we must first understand its context. Imperial Rome, in the course of the 1st and 2nd centuries, fought 3 distinct major wars that it classified under one grim title, the Bellum Judacum, or the Jewish Wars. These 3 wars were not foreign conquests. They were revolts born from within. Shiwak, they were explosive uprisings by Jewish communities living within the Eastern Roman provinces. The first and the third of these wars were geographically focused, centered in Judea itself. Their goal was unambiguous, to establish a Jewish state completely free from Roman control. The first of these revolts is the most infamous. It was a long, grinding conflict that lasted from 68 to 73 AD. It formed the backdrop to some of history's most dramatic and tragic encounters. It gave us the apocalyptic siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD. It culminated in the hopeless, symbolic last stand at Masada in 73 AD. The siege of Jerusalem in particular left a scar that would never heal. The Roman occupation of the Holy City in 70 AD resulted in the complete and methodical destruction of Herod's temple. The Roman general in charge of that siege was Titus Flavius Vespasian the Younger, son of the emperor. Titus was a pragmatic and ruthless commander. He saw the temple not merely as a religious building. He identified it as a spiritual and political focal point for Jewish nationalist aspirations. It was the heart of the rebellion, and he reacted accordingly. The temple was torn down, its treasures looted, and its foundations overturned. The rebel armies that had defended it were systematically massacred. Thousands upon thousands of Jews were sold into slavery, dispersed across the empire to serve in mines, villas, and quarries. Others were shipped to Rome itself for a specific, symbolic purpose. They were used as brute labor to build the Flavian amphitheater. A monument built by the enslaved for the entertainment of their enslavers. A building we know today as the Roman Colosseum. The first revolt was crushed. And although the Jews were not, at this time, expelled from Jerusalem, the impact of their defeat was absolute. Their catastrophic losses, both in human life and in spiritual identity, with the loss of their temple, had left them a deeply embittered people. Their holiest site was gone. Their independence was a shattered dream. They were a nation broken, but not destroyed. Despite the devastation, they still constituted the majority of the population of Judea. The homeland remained their demographic center, but the Jewish people were not confined to Judea. For centuries, there had been significant Jewish minority communities scattered throughout the eastern provinces. They were in Syria, on the island of Cyprus, and especially in the bustling urban areas of northern Egypt. Egypt's largest metropolis, Alexandria, was a jewel of the Roman world, a global center of learning and commerce. Sharia was also a tinderbox. Alexandria was home to some 150,000 Jews. They lived in a state of uneasy coexistence and constant, simmering conflict with the city's largest demographic, the Greek population. Sure, I mean, these two communities were rivals, separated by culture, religion, and economics, and their animosity was a well-known problem for Roman governors. Echtewurm, this was the state of the East when the Second Jewish War, the War of Kitos, broke out in 115 AD. Unlike the First War, this one seemed to come from nowhere. Exactly what caused the revolt is unknown. The historical sources are silent on the immediate trigger. There was no new edict, no tax, no single outrage that history recorded. Some modern scholars have suggested that Emperor Trajan's massive war against the Parthians played a role. Trajan was deep in the east, pushing the borders of the empire to their furthest extent. It is possible that the Parthians, Rome's great rival, made deliberate attempts to ignite the Jewish community. A community already known to be disaffected with Rome. A massive internal revolt would be the perfect tool to destabilize the eastern part of the empire and force Trajan to abandon his campaign. It is a plausible theory. However, the nature of the war itself argues against this. Its spontaneous nature, its diverse and seemingly uncoordinated leaders, and the raw brutality of the revolt suggests that it was not a pre-planned event. This did not look like a coordinated geopolitical strategy. It looked like an explosion of pure pent-up rage. A compelling case for this is the fact that the Kitos War broke out in two places simultaneously, separated by hundreds of miles of sea and land. It erupted in Mesopotamia, where Trajan's armies were currently operating, and in North Africa. The Mesopotamian front was a military insurgency. Nasr, groups of armed Jewish men living in the newly conquered territories, surrounded and massacred the Roman garrisons left to police the region. It was a strategic and bloody move, aimed directly at the Roman military. But it was in North Africa, specifically in the province of Cyrenaica, that the revolt erupted with its most terrible intensity. This was not a strategic military campaign. It was a social conflagration. The angry Jewish mobs that poured into the streets of the capital, Cyrene, were rallied by a charismatic and terrifying new leader. He was an agitator named Lucas. His Hellenized or Greek-style name was Andreas. Lucuas was not just a rebel, he had messianic and royal ambitions. Cassius Dio relates that this Lucas assumed the ancient and powerful title of King of the Jews. Hecanon, this was a direct challenge not only to Rome, but to the memory of the Herodian dynasty. Furthermore, Lucas definitely seemed to have been sharpening an axe of a religious nature. His was not just a war for political freedom. It was a holy war. Indeed, he is credited with a systematic campaign of destruction. He led his followers against the temples and cult buildings of the Greco-Roman gods in the city of Cyrene, tearing them to the ground. This was an act of profound ideological and religious defiance. Furthermore, Lucas and his followers also destroyed Roman government buildings. They targeted the basilicas, the archives, and the public baths. They saw these as the symbols of government pressure and the hated Gentile influence over the Jewish community. The city of Cyrene had, in fact, been home to a large and ancient Jewish community since pre-Roman times. The resentment had clearly been simmering for generations. The movement Lukuas unleashed was not a disciplined army. It became an unwieldy mob. It was composed predominantly of young, lower-class men, emboldened by their new leader and their initial shocking success. They proved impossible to control. The revolt descended into a carnival of horror. Dio Cassius, our primary source for these events, blames them for a long list of atrocities. His account is so extreme that it strains belief. He wrote that they used the internal organs of the Romans and Greeks they murdered as belts to gird themselves. No more. They may be exaggerated propaganda designed to dehumanize the rebels. Or they may be a dim, shocked echo of a very real, frenzied brutality. Somewhat more plausibly, Dio Cassius also accused them of forcing their Roman captives to fight as gladiators. This detail rings with a grim, poetic justice. Indeed, considering that Jews were common victims of Roman brutality in the arenas, it is safe to assume that this was a deliberate and symbolic reversal. Like Spartacus and his rebel gladiators generations before, the Cyrenaic Jews also traded roles with the Romans. The masters were forced into the sand to die for the entertainment of the slaves. The oppressed became the oppressors. But Lukuas and his rebels did not stop at Cyrene. Their victory in the province was total. Flushed with success, they marched their mob eastward, crossing the desert border into the wealthiest province of all, Egypt. When they arrived, they found that the great city of Alexandria had been abandoned by the Roman governor, Marcus Rutilius Lupus. Lupus, facing a massive internal uprising in an invading rebel army, had fled, leaving the city to its fate. Here, in Alexandria, Lucas's forces joined with the local Jewish communities. This was the community that already lived in constant conflict with their neighbors. Secretly, they held a deep, ingrained hatred for Greco-Roman culture, and especially for the Greek majority that dominated Alexandria's civic life, where the result was a bloodbath. Vicious clashes erupted between the Greek and Jewish communities in the streets. It was a citywide pogrom and counter-pogrom. The rebels, led by Lucas, repeated their actions from Cyrene on a much grander scale. They began a systematic burning of Hellenistic Greek temples. These burnings, acts of both religious zeal and communal hatred, culminated in the destruction of Pompey's tomb. The city of Alexandria, the lighthouse of the Mediterranean, was completely destroyed. It was left a smoking ruin, its libraries and temples reduced to ash. The news of the success in Cyrene and the absolute destruction of Alexandria spread like wildfire. The message was clear. Rome was vulnerable, and the time for revenge was now. In response to this news, the Jews on the island of Cyprus also erupted. Their revolt was just as spontaneous and just as bloody. It produced almost identical results. These Cypriot Jews, led by a man named Artemius, marched on the provincial capital of Salamis. They burned it to the ground. Simultaneously, the fires of rebellion spread throughout Judea itself. The homeland, quiet since the fall of Masada, was once again in open war against Rome. All of this, the fall of Cyrene, the annihilation of Alexandria, the burning of Salamis, and the uprisings in Mesopotamia and Judea, apparently occurred in the same year, 115 AD. It happened while Emperor Trajan was far away, pursuing his dream of Eastern conquest. The Roman forces in the east were greatly reduced. They were spread thin, clashing with Parthian armies and simultaneously trying to contain the Jewish rebels in Mesopotamia. The situation was desperate. Rome, however, did not panic. So it acted. The emperor dispatched one of his toughest, most reliable commanders. The Praetorian prefect, Quintus Marcius Turbo, was sent at the head of several legions, supported by a massive fleet. His task was simple and brutal: quell the Jewish revolts in Egypt and Cyrene at all costs. This was no simple police action. The text tells us it took no less than 2 years of fierce fighting to finally quell these revolts. 2 years of methodical, merciless warfare. Turbo had to reconquer Alexandria street by street. Joaquin, he had to hunt down rebel bands across the North African desert. Eventually, the Roman war machine proved unstoppable. Lucullus, his army shattered, fled the continent. He and his remaining followers managed to escape to Judea, the last remaining bastion of the revolt. In Mesopotamia, a different general was given command. Lucius Quietus was tasked with silencing the rebels who had massacred the Roman garrisons. Quietus was not a traditional Roman aristocrat. He was a prince of the Mori, a Moor from North Africa who had risen through the ranks on sheer talent and ruthlessness. He had a reputation for being arrogant and sadistic. His campaign in Mesopotamia confirmed that reputation. When his destruction of the Jewish communities there was so total that it was tantamount to ethnic cleansing. He is credited with the destruction or expulsion of virtually all the Jews from Mesopotamia. He had silenced the rebels by eliminating them. By the autumn of 117 AD, the revolts in Egypt, Cyrene, and Mesopotamia had been brutally extinguished. Now the two victorious Roman commanders, Turbo and Lucius, converged. Both generals, veterans of this horrific war, entered Judea. The province had become the final focal point of the entire revolt. It was now under the joint leadership of the refugee king, Lucas, and two local rebel leaders, Julian and Pappus. Tanamwar, they gathered their remaining forces in the city of Lydda. Tutuanar, the Romans, in their characteristic methodical fashion, laid siege to the city. There would be no escape. Siege was long and agonizing. The Jewish rebels were forced to endure great hardship. Sauron, they were starving, trapped, and facing the combined might of Rome's most ruthless generals. When Lydda finally fell to an assault, the Roman response was absolute. There was no mercy. Gibor and all of its defenders were killed. Survivors were made an example of.
Where are you taking us? Have mercy!
Many were crucified outside the city walls, a warning to all who would ever again challenge the power of Rome. The Kitos War was over. Judea was broken. Egypt and Cyrene were pacified. Mesopotamia was cleansed. Shurianum, what of the fourth front? What happened on the island of Cyprus? History provides no answer. It is unknown when and how the revolt in Cyprus was extinguished. The campaign led by Artemius, the burning of Salamis, these events are recorded. But the Roman counterattack, the name of the general who led it, the fate of Artemius, and the details of the island's subjugation are lost. No record of it remains in history. It is a perfect, chilling blank. The amount of destruction caused by the Kitos War was, by all accounts, titanic. The numbers preserved by Dio Cassius are staggering, almost unbelievable. In Horihori, he records that some 220,000 Greeks and Romans were brutally murdered in Egypt and Cyrene by the Jews. He claims another 240,000 died in Cyprus. This totals 460,000 dead civilians and soldiers in a spontaneous revolt that lasted little more than 2 years. This scale of slaughter is difficult to comprehend. Even if the numbers are exaggerated, they point to a conflict of unimaginable ferocity. Papyri found in the sands of Egypt, written by common people, attest to the merciless fighting. They describe a complete breakdown of society, a war fought not just by armies but by Jewish and Greek gangs. They preserve the state of fear in which the common people of the province lived. As for the Jewish casualties, Dio Cassius did not bother to record them. They were the defeated, and in his eyes, their losses were not worthy of tallying.